The morning sun cast long shadows across Springdale's quiet streets, a deceptive calm that belied the undercurrents of tension brewing beneath the surface. Ethan Martinez guided his garbage truck down Maple Lane, his movements mechanical, practiced from years of routine. At 35, the weight of his responsibilities pressed harder than the truck's hydraulic lift. His daughter's medical bills haunted every moment. Sarah, just 8 years old, lay in the hospital, her rare blood condition draining not just their finances, but his very soul. Each collected trash bag felt like another reminder of his struggle, discarded, overlooked, fighting to maintain dignity. As he approached the Henderson residence, something broke through his usual monotony. A small figure darted from between two houses, running with a desperation that made his professional instincts prickle. Mia, Olivia's daughter, 6 years old, with wild eyes and tears streaming down her cheeks. "Help! Please help!" Her voice cracked, a blend of terror and hope that stopped Ethan mid-motion. He killed the truck's engine, stepping down onto the street. Mia ran directly toward him, her small body trembling. Her yellow sundress was wrinkled, one sleeve partially torn, revealing pale skin marked with what looked like the beginnings of a bruise. "Mia, what's wrong?" Ethan's voice was gentle but firm, years of garbage route interactions having taught him how to approach vulnerable moments. She couldn't speak, just sobbed, grabbing his work pants and burying her face against the rough fabric. Her tiny hands clutched him with a desperation that suggested something far more serious than a child's typical emotional outburst. Without hesitation, Ethan pulled out his cell phone. His fingers, calloused from years of manual labor, dialed 911 with a precision born of growing concern. "Springdale Police Department, what's your emergency?" The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional. "This is Ethan Martinez. I'm on Maple Lane, and a child, Mia Henderson, is extremely distressed. Something seems seriously wrong." He kept his tone measured, aware that panic could compromise the information. The dispatcher began asking standard questions, but Ethan's attention remained on Mia. Her sobs had transformed into quiet, terrified whimpers. Whatever had happened was beyond a typical childhood upset. He knelt, bringing himself to her eye level. "Mia, can you tell me what happened?" Her response was a broken whisper. "Daddy! Daddy!" Ethan felt his professional composure slip, replaced by a surge of protective instinct. He'd noticed the tension between Olivia and her ex-husband Lucas during previous encounters. Hushed arguments, Olivia's increasingly nervous demeanor. But this was different. The police dispatcher continued gathering information, her questions professional and precise. Ethan provided details about the address, Mia's condition, his own contact information. Minutes later, the distant wail of sirens broke the morning's silence. Mia remained pressed against him, her small body a testament to fear Ethan couldn't fully comprehend. He was just a garbage man, a single father struggling to keep his own life together. Intervention wasn't his typical role. Yet here he was, holding a terrified child, waiting for authorities to unravel whatever darkness had erupted in this seemingly peaceful neighborhood. As police cars approached, their lights cutting through the morning light, Ethan realized his world was about to change. Something told him this was more than a routine call. This was the beginning of a story that would challenge everything he thought he knew about community, protection, and the thin line between being a bystander and becoming a guardian. The first patrol car pulled up, doors opening to reveal 2 officers moving with calculated precision. Ethan looked down at Mia, then back at the approaching law enforcement, knowing that whatever came next would test his resolve in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The morning sunlight filtered through the dusty blinds of Ethan Martinez's small apartment, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. His garbage truck sat parked outside, a silent testament to the routine that paid his bills but never quite covered enough. Weeks earlier, Ethan had first noticed something was off about Lucas's visits to Olivia's house. It wasn't just the frequency that caught his attention, but the subtle signs of tension that seemed to hang in the air like a thick, uncomfortable fog. Each time Lucas arrived, Ethan would catch glimpses from his truck or through his kitchen window. Olivia's body language spoke volumes, shoulders hunched, movements hesitant, her eyes constantly darting around as if expecting something terrible to happen. It was a dance of fear that Ethan recognized all too well. He remembered one particular morning. Lucas's black SUV pulled up precisely at 9:37 a.m., its engine purring with an almost predatory intensity. Ethan was preparing to start his route, sorting through the day's collection schedule, when movement caught his eye. From the corner of his window, he watched as Lucas approached Olivia's front door. The interaction was brief, but loaded with unspoken tension. Lucas stood too close, his body language aggressive, blocking the doorway. Olivia's responses were measured, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. A protective stance Ethan knew all too well from his own life of constant struggle and survival. As a garbage man, Ethan had learned to be observant. His job wasn't just about collecting trash, it was about understanding the subtle rhythms of the neighborhood. He noticed patterns. Lucas's visits were becoming more frequent, more intense. Sometimes he would stay for hours, other times just minutes. But each time, Olivia's demeanor grew more subdued. Mia would often be nowhere in sight during these visits. Ethan found this particularly unsettling. "It's not my business," Ethan muttered to himself, turning back to his route schedule. But the words rang hollow, even to his own ears. His own struggles weighed heavily on him. His daughter's medical treatments were astronomical, and every penny counted. The thought of getting involved in someone else's domestic drama seemed like an unnecessary risk. Yet, something about the situation gnawed at him. He remembered the nights when his ex-wife would come home bruised, the arguments that would echo through their thin apartment walls before she left for good. The memories made his hands clench involuntarily. Community, his mother used to say, was about looking out for each other. But community also meant minding your own business, staying out of trouble. Ethan had learned that lesson the hard way. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. When Lucas's visits became more aggressive, Ethan's internal conflict intensified. One afternoon, he heard what sounded like a muffled cry from Olivia's direction. He paused, garbage bin suspended mid-air, listening intently. Silence followed. "Just stay out of it," he told himself firmly. But the words felt like a betrayal to something deeper, a sense of moral responsibility that ran counter to his survival instinct. By the end of that week, Ethan had made a decision. He would watch. He would be alert. Not interfere, but be prepared. If something truly dangerous happened, he wouldn't hesitate to call the authorities. Little did he know how soon that moment would come, and how dramatically it would change everything. Something was coming, and he would be ready. The early morning light filtered through the worn curtains of Ethan Martinez's small apartment, casting long shadows across the cluttered space. Medical bills were scattered across the kitchen table like a painful mosaic of his reality. Each envelope represented another piece of his daughter's battle. A battle that was slowly draining not just his finances, but his hope. Sarah, his 8-year-old daughter, lay sleeping in the bedroom, her thin frame barely visible beneath the hospital-issued blanket they'd brought home last week. Her latest round of treatments had been brutal, and the stack of unpaid medical invoices was a constant reminder of his mounting desperation. Ethan ran his fingers through his hair, the stress etched deep into the lines of his face. As a garbage truck driver, his salary was barely enough to keep food on the table, let alone cover the astronomical medical expenses. He'd picked up extra shifts, taken on side jobs, and even considered selling his truck, but nothing seemed enough. Pride had always been his weakness. The community knew about his struggles, but Ethan refused most offers of help. He'd grown up believing a father should handle his own problems, a lesson ingrained by his own father's stubborn independence. Yet, with each passing day, that pride was wearing thinner than Sarah's medical charts. His mind drifted to Olivia and Mia, his neighbors, whose own struggles seemed to mirror his own sense of vulnerability. During his garbage collection route, he'd become increasingly aware of the tension surrounding their home. Lucas's visits were like storm clouds, casting long shadows of fear and uncertainty. As he prepared Sarah's morning medication, Ethan's thoughts returned to the recent incident. The way Mia had run to him, desperate and terrified, resonated deeply. He understood fear, the kind that grips you and doesn't let go. His daughter's illness had taught him that fear intimately. Watching Olivia and Mia, he recognized something familiar. The same desperation, the same fear of being overwhelmed. Lucas's visits were becoming more frequent, more intense. Ethan found himself torn between his own overwhelming challenges and a growing sense of responsibility towards his neighbors. His moral compass was shifting. The financial strain of Sarah's medical treatment had initially made him focus solely on survival. But now, observing Olivia's fearful glances and Mia's increasingly subdued demeanor, he felt a moral obligation brewing. The community center's monthly newsletter lay unopened, another reminder of the support network he was reluctant to embrace. Yet, something was changing. The line between personal struggle and community responsibility was blurring. As he prepared to leave for work, Ethan checked on Sarah. Her shallow breaths and pale complexion were a constant reminder of what was at stake. The medical bills weren't just paper. They represented her life, her future. As he started the truck's engine, one thought resonated clearly. Sometimes, survival isn't just about protecting yourself, but about protecting those who cannot protect themselves. The day was just beginning, and already Ethan Martinez knew everything was about to change. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Springdale's quiet streets, but the peace was shattered by a sharp, muffled sound that caught Ethan's attention. He was organizing his garbage truck, methodical as always, when the heated voices drifted through the narrow space between the Henderson and Martinez houses. "You can't do this anymore, Lucas." Olivia's voice trembled, a mixture of anger and fear that made Ethan's muscles tense. He didn't mean to eavesdrop, but the raw emotion in her voice made it impossible to ignore. Carefully, he positioned himself closer, pretending to adjust some equipment on his truck while straining to hear the conversation. Lucas's response was a low, menacing growl. "You think you can just walk away? After everything we've been through?" Ethan's hands clenched involuntarily. He'd seen this pattern before. The controlled rage, the subtle threats. His own painful memories flickered at the edges of his consciousness, reminding him of the delicate dance between control and violence. Through the window, he caught a glimpse of Mia. The little girl was huddled in a corner, her usual vibrant energy replaced by a stillness that spoke volumes. Her wide eyes darted between her parents, reflecting a fear no child should ever experience. The argument continued, fragments of accusations and defensive retorts punctuating the afternoon air. Ethan noticed how Olivia's body language had changed. Her shoulders were rigid, her movements calculated. She was prepared, almost defensive. "You're not coming near Mia," Olivia declared, her voice finding a strength that seemed new. "Not after what you've done." Something in Lucas's subsequent laugh sent a chill down Ethan's spine. It wasn't a laugh of humor, but of something darker. Threat, promise, potential violence. As quickly as the argument had erupted, it dissolved. The front door slammed, and Ethan heard the distinct sound of a car peeling away. He remained still, processing what he'd witnessed. His mind drifted to his own daughter, Sarah, battling her illness in the hospital. The vulnerability of children, the powerlessness of parents facing overwhelming challenges. These thoughts intertwined with what he'd just observed. Later that evening, as he sat in his small apartment, the scene replayed in his mind. Mia's silent terror was particularly haunting. She reminded him of vulnerability. Ethan realized he was at a crossroads. He could continue being a passive observer, or he could become an active participant in protecting his neighbors. The decision weighed heavily, complicated by his own precarious life circumstances. As night fell, he made a silent promise. He would watch. He would be vigilant. If Lucas continued to pose a threat, Ethan would not stand idly by. The moonlight cast soft shadows across his modest living room, illuminating a photograph of Sarah, her smile a beacon of hope amidst uncertainty. Her battle had taught him resilience, and now that same resilience urged him to consider the battles of those around him. Something was brewing between Lucas and Olivia, and Ethan Martinez, garbage man and father, was beginning to understand that sometimes being a good neighbor meant being more than just an observer. The signs of danger were becoming impossible to ignore. He'd been watching, collecting fragments of evidence like puzzle pieces that refused to fit perfectly. The frequent visits, the hushed arguments, Mia's increasingly withdrawn demeanor, everything pointed to a brewing storm. Ethan's instincts, honed by years of navigating life's challenging terrain, were screaming that something was terribly wrong. Today felt different. The air seemed charged with an electric anticipation, a warning of impending conflict. As he maneuvered the truck down Maple Street, Ethan's eyes kept drifting to Olivia's house. Lucas's black sedan was parked at an aggressive angle, half blocking the driveway, a territorial marker that made Ethan's skin crawl. He remembered the heated argument he'd overheard weeks ago, the menacing undertones in Lucas's voice. Each interaction seemed calculated, designed to intimidate and control. Ethan had seen this pattern before, not just in neighbors' lives, but in painful memories of his own past. Parking the truck, Ethan pulled out a small notebook he'd been using to document Lucas's visits. Dates, times, behavioral patterns. He was building a case, though he wasn't entirely sure what he would do with the information. His daughter Sarah's medical bills consumed most of his mental energy, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that Mia and Olivia were in genuine danger. "I can't just sit back and do nothing," he muttered to himself, flipping through the meticulously kept notes. The notebook contained subtle observations, Lucas's aggressive body language, the way he would stand too close to Olivia, the controlled anger that seemed to simmer just beneath his surface. Each entry was a testament to Ethan's growing conviction that intervention might be necessary. As if on cue, Lucas emerged from Olivia's house. His movements were deliberate, predatory. Ethan watched, his hand unconsciously tightening around the steering wheel. Lucas paused, looking directly at Ethan's truck. Their eyes met, a moment of silent confrontation. Ethan didn't flinch. Years of facing life's challenges had taught him the power of steady resolve. The cat-and-mouse game was escalating. Ethan knew he was walking a fine line between observation and intervention. He couldn't act without concrete evidence, but his instincts were screaming that time was running out. "I'm not just a bystander," he whispered, a newfound determination settling over him like armor. Not this time. His decision was made. He would gather more evidence, document everything meticulously. If Lucas was indeed a threat, Ethan would ensure he couldn't harm Olivia or Mia. The system might be slow, but documentation was power. As Lucas's car pulled away, Ethan started his truck's engine. His mind was racing, plotting, preparing. The hunter was becoming the watched, and Ethan Martinez was ready for whatever came next. Next morning, Ethan continued his garbage collection route. The familiar rhythm of lifting and dumping bins had become almost mechanical, a stark contrast to the heightened tension that had been building over the past weeks. Suddenly, a blur of motion caught his eye. Mia Henderson came running towards him, her small frame trembling, tears streaming down her cheeks. Unlike her previous encounters, this time her desperation was palpable, raw, and urgent. "Help! Please! Help!" she cried, her voice breaking with panic. Ethan immediately stopped the truck, setting the brake and jumping down. He knelt to her level, his garbage collector's gloves still on, his weathered face etched with concern. "Mia, what's wrong?" "Daddy, he's hurting Mommy," she gasped between sobs, her small hands clutching at Ethan's work uniform. Her eyes were wide with terror, a mixture of fear and hope that someone would finally intervene. Without hesitation, Ethan pulled out his phone and dialed 911. His years of observing the subtle tensions between Olivia and Lucas crystallized in this moment. This wasn't just a child's imagination. Something was seriously wrong. 911, what's your emergency?" The dispatcher's calm voice answered. "I'm reporting a potential domestic violence situation," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. He provided his address and details, keeping one hand gently on Mia's shoulder to comfort her. "An officer is being dispatched immediately," the dispatcher assured him. Mia continued to shake, her small body convulsing with fear. Ethan noticed bruises peeking from beneath her sleeve, evidence of something more sinister than a simple argument. "You're safe now," he told her, his voice a mixture of protection and reassurance. "Can you tell me exactly what happened?" Between broken sobs, Mia revealed fragments of the morning's events. Lucas had been increasingly aggressive, his visits growing more volatile. Today, he had pushed Olivia, threatened her, and Mia had managed to escape and run to Ethan. Within minutes, police sirens wailed in the distance. The quiet street suddenly transformed, neighbors peeking out from behind curtains, witnessing the unfolding drama. Two officers approached, their professional demeanor immediately calming the chaotic scene. They spoke softly to Mia, carefully collecting her account, while another officer prepared to enter Olivia's house. "Mr. Martinez," one officer addressed Ethan, "your quick action might have prevented a serious situation. Can you provide a statement about what you've observed recently?" Ethan recounted the suspicious visits, Lucas's aggressive behavior, and Mia's recurring fear. Each detail painted a picture of escalating domestic tension. As the officers worked, Ethan kept Mia close, offering silent support. The house remained tense. Officers emerged moments later with Lucas in handcuffs, his face a mixture of anger and defeat. Olivia followed, looking shaken but relieved. Mia buried her face in Ethan's work shirt, seeking protection. He understood then that this was more than just neighborly intervention. This was about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. As the police car drove away with Lucas, the street slowly returned to its morning routine. But everything had changed. Ethan knew his life, and the lives of Olivia and Mia would never be the same. The garbage truck stood silent, a witness to a morning that transformed from routine to remarkable, a testament to the power of paying attention, of being willing to act when others might look away. Mia looked up at Ethan, her eyes now calmer but still holding a residual fear. "Thank you," she whispered. Ethan simply nodded, understanding that sometimes being a hero isn't about grand gestures, but about being present when someone needs help most. The wail of police sirens pierced the quiet suburban morning, shattering the fragile calm of Springdale's maple-lined street. Multiple patrol cars converged on Olivia's modest two-story house, their lights flashing red and blue against the pale morning light. Ethan watched, his heart racing, as officers moved with practiced precision. Lucas stood frozen on the front porch, his body tense and defiant. Two officers approached him, their hands resting cautiously near their holsters. "Mr. Lucas Henderson," one officer announced firmly, "you're being detained for domestic threats and potential assault." Olivia emerged from behind the screen door, her face a complex mix of fear and relief. Mia clung to her mother's leg, her small frame trembling, but her eyes showing a newfound sense of security. Ethan observed the scene from nearby, feeling a combination of protective instinct and raw emotion. "I didn't do anything wrong," Lucas protested, but his voice lacked conviction. The officers were methodical, reading him his rights with clinical detachment. His resistance seemed to drain away with each word, replaced by a sullen resignation. Detective Sarah Ramirez, a seasoned investigator with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind, approached Ethan. "Mr. Martinez," she said, her voice professional but not unkind, "your statement was crucial in this intervention." Ethan shifted uncomfortably, unused to being the center of attention. "I just did what anyone would do," he mumbled, looking down at his work boots. But both knew that wasn't entirely true. Not everyone would have noticed. Not everyone would have acted. As Lucas was handcuffed and guided towards a patrol car, Olivia's trembling hands found Mia's shoulders. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, her voice catching. "We're safe now." The neighborhood had begun to gather, curious faces peering from windows, neighbors standing in driveways. Some looked concerned, others relieved. The unspoken tension that had surrounded Lucas for months was finally dissipating. Detective Ramirez pulled out a notebook. "We've been building a case against Mr. Henderson for months," she told Ethan quietly. "Your observations provided the missing pieces. Domestic violence cases are complex, and community vigilance makes a significant difference." Ethan understood now that silence could be as dangerous as the threat itself. Inside the police car, Lucas stared straight ahead, the fight seemingly gone from him. But Ethan caught a fleeting moment, a cold, calculated look that suggested this wasn't over. A chill ran down his spine. Olivia approached Ethan, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said simply, "for seeing us, for helping." Mia peeked around her mother's leg, offering a small, brave smile. In that moment, Ethan saw resilience, a quality he recognized from his own struggles with Sarah's illness. As the police began processing the scene, a sense of resolution settled over the street. The immediate danger had passed, but everyone knew the real healing was just beginning. The patrol cars began to disperse, Lucas secured in the back of a vehicle. Neighbors started returning to their morning routines, but something had shifted. A community had stood together, protecting its most vulnerable members. The police conference room hummed with a tense, clinical atmosphere as Detective Sarah Ramirez carefully laid out the case files, documenting Lucas Henderson's criminal history. Ethan sat nearby, his weathered hands clasped tightly, listening intently as the layers of Lucas's dark past were methodically revealed. "Mr. Martinez," Detective Ramirez began, her voice professional yet tinged with a hint of compassion, "what we've uncovered goes far beyond a simple domestic dispute. The investigation had unearthed a complex web of criminal activities that Lucas had been orchestrating for years. He wasn't just a volatile ex-husband, he was a calculated predator who had systematically manipulated and threatened Olivia, using their shared history as a weapon of psychological control. Bank statements, intercepted communications, and witness testimonies painted a chilling portrait. Lucas had been involved in an intricate money laundering operation using his small construction business as a front. When Olivia discovered evidence of his illegal activities and threatened to expose him, he began a calculated campaign of intimidation. He never intended to simply reconcile, the detective explained. His visits to Olivia were designed to instill fear, to demonstrate that he could reach her and Mia whenever he wanted. The psychological warfare was deliberate. Ethan felt a cold shiver run down his spine. The pieces were falling into place. Every suspicious visit, every tense moment he had witnessed, was part of a larger, more sinister strategy. Olivia, who was seated nearby, looked both relieved and exhausted. Her hands trembled slightly as she listened to the details of her ex-husband's elaborate scheme. Mia sat close to her, holding her mother's hand, her young eyes reflecting a mixture of fear and newfound safety. "Your intervention," Detective Ramirez said, turning to Ethan, "was crucial. Lucas was escalating. Our investigation suggests he was planning something more extreme, potentially a kidnapping, or worse." The weight of those words settled heavily in the room. Ethan realized that his decision to act, to not look away, had potentially saved lives. His own struggles with his daughter's illness had made him more attuned to vulnerability, more willing to recognize when someone needed help. "What happens now?" Ethan asked, his voice steady but carrying an underlying current of emotion. "Lucas will be held without bail," the detective explained. "The evidence we've collected ensures he'll face multiple charges: domestic violence, stalking, attempted extortion, and his ongoing criminal enterprise." The community's response was immediate and overwhelming. Local news outlets began covering the story, portraying Ethan as a neighborhood hero who had stepped up when it mattered most. His modest garbage truck route became a symbol of unexpected heroism, a testament to the idea that ordinary people could make extraordinary differences. For Olivia, the revelations brought a complex mix of emotions. Relief mingled with anger, healing intertwined with lingering trauma. But beneath it all was a growing sense of empowerment. She had survived, and now she could truly protect herself and her daughter. Mia, too, showed remarkable resilience. During a brief moment of quiet, she looked up at Ethan and whispered, "Thank you for helping Mommy." Her simple words carried more emotional weight than any official statement. As the meeting concluded, Ethan felt a profound sense of interconnectedness. His own battles, the constant worry about his daughter's medical treatments, the financial strain, seemed momentarily distant. He had been part of something larger, a community coming together to protect its most vulnerable members. The dark truth about Lucas was now exposed, a calculated predator whose power had been dismantled by the collective strength of community vigilance. And at the center of this transformation was Ethan, a garbage man who had become an unexpected guardian. As he left the police station, the afternoon sunlight seemed brighter, filled with a sense of hope and renewal that had been hard-won but was now undeniably real. The community center bustled with anticipation. its walls adorned with local photographs and banners celebrating neighborhood heroes. Ethan stood near the stage, his work boots seemingly out of place among the polished shoes and pressed clothes of Springdale's prominent citizens. The room hummed with whispers of his recent act of courage, how he had protected Olivia and Mia from Lucas's threats. Detective Sarah Ramirez stepped to the microphone, her voice cutting through the ambient noise. Today, we honor Ethan Martinez, a man who exemplifies the true meaning of community protection. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, his calloused hands twisting the edge of his worn work shirt. The medal of community service felt heavy around his neck, a weight that seemed to press not just on his chest, but on his carefully guarded secrets. As the crowd applauded, Ethan's mind drifted to Sarah, his 8-year-old daughter lying in the hospital. The medical bills were mounting, a mountain of debt that seemed insurmountable. He had always prided himself on managing alone, on being the strong, silent provider. But today, something felt different. Mayor Thompson approached, shaking Ethan's hand. "Your actions saved a family, Mr. Martinez. Springdale is proud of you." The words hung in the air, a challenge to Ethan's long-standing resolve to keep his struggles private. His daughter's pale face flashed in his mind. The countless treatments, the endless nights of worry, the financial strain that threatened to crush him. Taking a deep breath, Ethan stepped closer to the microphone. The room fell silent, sensing something significant was about to happen. "I appreciate the honor," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "but there's something I need to share." He spoke about Sarah, her ongoing battle with a rare blood disorder, the experimental treatments that offered a glimmer of hope, the medical bills that had consumed every penny he'd saved. His voice cracked as he described the sleepless nights, the constant fear of losing her. "I've been trying to do this alone," Ethan continued, "but the truth is, I can't. Sarah needs a specialized treatment that costs more than I'll make in 5 years of garbage collection." The room remained hushed, a collective breath of compassion filling the space. Detective Ramirez watched with a mix of admiration and understanding, remembering how Ethan had stepped up for Olivia and Mia, despite his own struggles. Olivia, seated in the front row, felt a surge of gratitude. She understood the weight of secrets, the shame of vulnerability. Her hand found Mia's, squeezing it gently. As Ethan finished speaking, something remarkable began to happen. People in the audience started standing, pulling out checkbooks, making pledges. The local business owner, the school principal, retired veterans. They all seemed moved by Ethan's raw honesty. "We're going to help your daughter," Mayor Thompson announced, his voice breaking the emotional silence. "Springdale takes care of its own." Within hours, a community fund was established. Local businesses pledged support, a GoFundMe campaign went viral, and the hospital even offered to review Sarah's treatment plan for potential cost reductions. Ethan stood overwhelmed, tears threatening to break through his stoic facade. The very community he had protected was now protecting him. Olivia approached, Mia by her side. "Thank you," she said simply, understanding the courage it took for Ethan to be vulnerable. "For everything." Mia hugged Ethan's leg, a gesture that spoke volumes about the bond they had formed through shared vulnerability and courage. As the evening wound down, Ethan realized something profound had shifted. He was no longer just a struggling single father or a garbage collector. He was part of something larger, a community that stood together, that protected its most vulnerable members. The medal around his neck no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a promise, a symbol of hope, resilience, and the extraordinary power of human connection. The morning sunlight filtered through the windows of Ethan's small apartment, casting a warm glow on Sarah's pale face. She lay quietly on the couch, her once gaunt cheeks now showing signs of renewed strength. The medical treatments, funded by the community's incredible generosity, had begun to work their magic. Ethan sat beside her, his weathered hands gently holding hers. The weight of the past months seemed to lift with each passing day. The community's support had been more than just financial. It was a lifeline of hope that had transformed their entire existence. He remembered the ceremony where everything changed. What had started as a moment of vulnerability, sharing his daughter's medical struggles, had become a turning point. The townspeople of Springdale had not just listened. They had acted. Fundraisers, medical support groups, and personal donations had poured in, giving Sarah a fighting chance she might never have had before. Olivia and Mia had been constant visitors. Mia would sit by Sarah, telling her stories and drawing colorful pictures that now decorated the walls of their small living room. The little girl who had once run to him in terror was now a beacon of joy and resilience. "Dad," Sarah whispered, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "Do you think we'll be okay?" Ethan smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "We're more than okay, sweetheart. We're family, and we're surrounded by people who care." The transformation went beyond medical treatment. Ethan had discovered a sense of community he never knew existed. His job as a garbage collector, once a source of quiet isolation, had become something more. The people of Springdale now saw him, truly saw him, not just as the man who collected their trash, but as a neighbor, a protector, a hero. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Olivia stood there, Mia peeking from behind her, a basket of homemade cookies in hand. "We thought you might like some company," Olivia said, her smile reflecting a newfound strength. As they settled in, sharing cookies and stories, Ethan realized how much had changed. The fear that once consumed him, fear of not being able to provide for Sarah, fear of being alone, had transformed into something powerful. Community, connection, hope. Mia approached Sarah, showing her a drawing. "This is us," she explained, pointing to stick figures holding hands. "You, me, and my mom. And Mr. Ethan, too." Sarah laughed, a sound that seemed to fill the entire room with light. Later that evening, Ethan reflected on their journey. The road had been difficult, filled with challenges that seemed insurmountable. But they had survived. More than that, they had thrived. He thought about the moment he first noticed something was wrong with Olivia and Mia's situation. He could have looked away. He could have minded his own business. Instead, he chose to act. That choice had changed everything. As night fell, Sarah sleeping peacefully beside him, Ethan understood the true meaning of hope. It wasn't about having a perfect life. It was about facing challenges together, supporting one another, and believing that no matter how dark things might seem, light was always possible. The story of Springdale was still being written, a tale of resilience, courage, and the extraordinary power of ordinary people caring for one another. And Ethan was grateful to be a part of it. Did you like this touching and surprising story? If so, we invite you to leave us a comment expressing your opinion. If you want to continue enjoying inspiring stories like this one, subscribe to our channel or check out the other videos shown at the bottom of the screen. Thank you.